On today's show, the Hawks have 14 games remaining in the season, including one coming up on Thursday. We'll get into how things have shaken out so far, how they might look at in the future, plus NCAA tournament stuff, a preview of Hawks Suns, and much more, and all that is on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1678 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening into Thursday. And today's show is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer, get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet at FanDuel Sportsbook. That's $200 if your bet wins. And the place to go is FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Also, should encourage you at the top of the podcast to make us your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to this podcast anywhere you get your podcast. Places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube, etc. I should lead off with this. I apologize if there's a little bit of background noise. I have a bit of a calamity on my hands at home. No issues there, just some unavoidable background stuff right now and work being done. So my apologies on that. But hopefully it's not too bad for the listeners on this podcast. And of course, it's been a while since I've actually done a full-on check-in and took stock with where the Hawks stack up. So I'll start with that at the top of the podcast, and later on we'll get into kind of a preview of Hawks Suns on Thursday evening, as well as some NCAA tournament stuff through the lens of the NBA draft. It's been very busy on the show recently as well. We did full coverage of the back-to-back in Los Angeles on Sunday and Monday. Prior to that, games in Portland and Utah, NBA draft stuff with Ben Pfeiffer last week, etc. And please catch up on all of that in the archive. With that out of the way, two mailbag questions that kind of dive into one central topic at the top of the podcast. So firstly, a question from Wayne, who says, can you go through the schedule and project how many games you think the Hawks will win the rest of the season? Before I do this, I will give the giant caveat about roster availability, because of course right now the Hawks are very banged up, and that kind of makes things challenging to project based on when guys come back, how they come back, who stays out, who comes back, all that stuff. The biggest one, of course, is that we do not currently know as of Wednesday, March 20th, when Trae Young will be back, or if he'll come back at all. His surgery was about 3 weeks ago at this point, and he was supposed to be reevaluated in 4 weeks, so we'll find out in about a week probably or so. That's just reevaluation, however, not return, so keep that in mind. For the most part, I will assume that Trae isn't going to play that much at the end of the season. He might come back at some point, but you can't bank on him coming back for a little while longer, and that is, of course, a huge factor in projecting things moving forward. Then you throw in the fact that Saddiq Bey is out for the year as one of the top 8 guys on the team. That's a big loss. It helps that Okongwu just came back. That's a very, very positive thing, but Bufkin is still out for a while longer. Jalen Johnson, as we'll talk about later on, is out for Thursday's game. You get the idea. There's all kinds of uncertainty, so it's a little bit hard. And also, your opponent uncertainty too. Some of these games the Hawks have been playing, not necessarily the last couple games, but before that, Portland had a bunch of injuries. Utah had a couple, not necessarily, but before that, teams missing their best players. It is March basketball. Most teams are banged up on some level right now, so keep all of that in mind and just take that with a grain of salt on some level. Then you have the actual schedule. So there's 14 games remaining. I would say 7 of them, which is half the schedule, are pretty clearly situations where the Hawks are going to be underdogs significantly unless something majorly changes with roster availability on both sides. Those games are the following. You have Phoenix on the road on Thursday. You have to play Boston twice more, Milwaukee again, at Dallas, at Denver, and then at Minnesota. I'll be very clear about this. That does not mean that you're going to lose all 7. In fact, you would not, the most likely scenario is not losing all 7 by any means. But they'll be solid underdogs in probably all of those games, especially when you factor in the opponent and where the games are going to be played. Then there are 3 more games where I would say the Hawks are going to be in pretty challenging spots, winnable for sure, and probably underdogs, I would guess, but not by a ton. These games are a little bit easier, though, than the other 7 I just mentioned. One of those is at Chicago, then they have a home game against Miami, and then they're at the Pacers. So those are 3 games where the Hawks might be underdogs, but it'll be kind of close. Then, finally, you have 4 games where the Hawks project to be pretty solid favorites, unless there's a roster disaster. Home for Charlotte, home for Portland, home for Detroit, and then home for Charlotte again. So that's 4 games against 3 of the worst teams in the league, and they're all home games. Now, I am aware, I can already hear people pushing back on this, the Hawks are 0-2 against the Hornets this year. I understand that. I'm not saying otherwise, and just like I said, the Hawks are not going to probably lose all 7 of those games. They might not win all 4 of these. That's part of the nature of the schedule. Nothing is a given in the NBA, as we've seen. The Hawks just went to LA and won as 9.5 point underdogs by a wide margin just a few days ago. Stuff is fluid in the league, but those 4 matchups are very favorable, let's say. Overall, as of right now, as I'm recording this podcast, the Hawks have the 9th most difficult schedule in the league by opponent winning percentage the rest of the way. So keep that in mind. It's not super difficult, but again, half the games they'll be underdogs of significance in, then three more tough ones, and then 4 pretty easy ones. But I answered that question first, but it kind of informs the second question. So the second question comes from Sarah, who says, what do the projection systems say about the Hawks' chances to make the play-in and also make the playoffs? So this is before the NBA games tonight, but ESPN's BPI projects the Hawks to finish 6-8 in their last 14 games. That brings them to 36-46. That's a pretty reasonable projection given what I just said. If you told me the Hawks go 2-5 in the 7 really hard games, 3-1 in the 4 easy games, maybe 1-2 in the semi-reasonable games, that's 6-8. So that seems kind of in line with a reasonable projection. Now, the Hawks could go 9-5. I wouldn't be stunned. If the Hawks went 3-11, I wouldn't be that surprised given their current roster. So none of that is a given, but as a 14-game projection, I think it's reasonable. And that's kind of where most projection systems are right now, to have the Hawks finishing 36-46 on the year. ESPN also gives the Hawks a 96.1% chance to make at least the play-in, and basically to make the play-in at this point in time, because they're not going to be having a chance to be in the top 6. So there's that. The Hawks have a 4.5 game lead right now on the Nets as I record this podcast. So let's say the Hawks finish exactly where the projection systems have them. That's with 36 wins. The Nets would have to go 10-3 in their last 13 games to make the play-in. And there is essentially no indication that Brooklyn is capable of doing that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but 10-3 for this Nets team, with the way they're playing recently, is an uphill battle. So if the Hawks do go 6-8, they're almost certainly going to be in the play-in. Of course, it wouldn't be shocking if the Hawks went 4-10. But even then, if they went 4-10, let's say, the Nets still have to go 8-5 to catch them, and 8-5 is a lot better than the Nets have been playing in recent days. So it is not 100%, as the systems indicate. There's always a difficulty for some people in seeing what 90-something% chance versus 100% chance. There's still a chance the Hawks miss the play-in, but right now they are significant favorites to make it, both in the projections and also, in my opinion, that backs that up, just because they have a huge lead with a very little time remaining, basically. So the last question there from Sarah comes about the playoffs themselves. So even with a 96% chance to make the play-in, ESPN has the Hawks with a 14.7% chance to make the 8-team actual playoffs. And part of that is because it is quite likely, if the Hawks make the play-in, that they'll be the 10 seed. Now, it's not for sure, but probably they're going to be the 10 seed at this point in time. If you're the 10 seed, you have to win back-to-back road games to make the playoffs. It's a small sample size so far in play-in history, but no team has ever done that. No team has ever gone 2-0 as a 10 seed and actually gotten in the playoffs. It's going to happen at some point, but it's not happened so far. And the Hawks would, in theory, be underdogs in both games. Now, I will say, if Trey came back and the Hawks were relatively healthy, I'm not sure they're underdogs against Chicago on the road. I mean, maybe they are by a point or two, but if they have Trey, that's a big if. But if they have Trey, Jalen, Onyeka, all those guys back, everyone but Sadiq, basically, that's not a real underdog situation. But the problem is the next game after that, they probably would be underdogs. Now, there is a scenario, I will say, that the Hawks would be, set up better as a 10 seed than most teams because they would have Trey coming back and they have more talent than a lot of teams. But also, Philadelphia might be in the play-in without Joel Embiid. And if the Hawks had Trey and the Sixers didn't have Embiid, the Hawks are better than the Sixers without Embiid. So that's not even an opinion. That's just the way that things have gone this year. So that's a long way away right now. But I think it doesn't seem crazy to me. I think if the Hawks get in the play-in, I would give them a little bit better chance to make the playoffs than these systems indicate. But still, being the 10 seed, it is unlikely, by definition, that you make the playoffs. It's possible, and the Hawks might be set up pretty well on that. And by the way, the Hawks have been a pretty great play-in team. It's a small sample size again, but they've been really good in the situations previously. Last year, they beat the Heat on the road soundly in the play-in game. So it's all what it is. But we'll have more of this later on. But as of right now, at the end of today's show, we'll talk about, the Suns game on Thursday. But that's kind of where we are at this stage. And we'll have more of that as we get going down the stretch of the season, because there's not that many games left in the 2023-24 campaign. Before we get to that stuff, though, let me tell you about the folks at eBay Motors. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors, and passion, drive, and patience are what bring home the wing and trophy, and they're also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors says that everything you're looking for to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. They have superchargers, they have roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and much more. Whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered across the board for your vehicle. They have over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, and you'll always find exactly what you are looking for at eBay Motors. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, you are also guaranteed to have that part fit your role in your ride every single time, and your money's coming back to you if it doesn't happen. So with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, and crucially, you are not burning any kind of cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you are looking for, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that victory you are seeking. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. One more time, the place to go is ebaymotors.com. eBay Guarantee Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, and say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the NCAA Tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer, get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet happens to win. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even bet on who's going to win it all. Bet on your favorite basketball players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and much more. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app is so easy to use. They have everything you're looking for across the sports betting space: over-unders, money lines, player props, future bets, and much more. The app is safe, it's secure. They cover the entire range of sports as well. Of course, that includes college basketball, the NBA, NFL, college football, MLB, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and much more. And now is an awesome time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook, and the place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, and with our mailbag theme of today's episode, I got a question about the NCAA tournament through the lens of the NBA draft. That comes from Jeff, who says, I am not a college basketball person, so can you tell me who to watch for the Hawks for the draft this week? First, I would suggest listening to the show's, actually two-part episode that I did with Ben Pfeiffer, NBA draft expert, about a week ago. We focused heavily on the college prospects because the tournament was looming. I will say, as I said on that podcast, there's a lot of non-college prospects in this class that are pretty interesting. Like, a lot of the top guys are either from overseas or from G League Ignite, so keep that in mind. But there are still plenty of guys to watch during the tournament. And from there, I put together a list of some guys to at least note and pay attention to by the NCAA tournament region that they are playing in. So I will begin with the South because that's the easiest and best draft-based region this year in the NCAA tournament bracket. And I'll go with Kentucky first. They are loaded as usual with prospects. Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham are lottery guys, or at least top 20 guys for most people. They're lottery guys for me. They also have DJ Wagner, Justin Edwards, Zvonimir Ivisic, also very intriguing as a potential first-round pick. And then 4 or 5 guys from there that are like potential second-round picks: Aaron Bradshaw, Antonio Reeves, etc., etc. So Kentucky is loaded, as they always are, with talent. Duke has guys as well. Kyle Filipowski is a Hawks potential target. Lottery pick for me. Very intriguing, kind of a combo big 7-footer. Jared McCain, top 20 guy for me. Very talented guard. Tyrese Proctor is draftable, so Duke has talent as well. This is one where I'll give the caveat now. I'm recording this podcast before they play in the first 4. So they could lose literally tonight, and this could be irrelevant. So keep that in mind. But Colorado is in the first 4. They have Cody Williams, who's actually going to be a lottery pick, plus Tristan DeSilva and Kedu Simpson. So keep that in mind. If they make a run, they are a team to watch. Marquette has Tyler Kolek and Oso Ighodaro. Both guys could be top 40-ish picks in this class. Also, Cameron Jones is a draft Twitter favorite that I enjoy as well. Jamal Shedd from Houston. The list goes on, but that's a pretty interesting region in a lot of different ways in the South. To the West, only 2 guys in the Western region are definite first-round picks for me, and they're actually on the same team. It's Jacoby Walter and Yves Missy from Baylor. Walter is more of a wing. Missy is a big. They could be in the Hawks' range and pretty interesting guys, so keep an eye on them. North Carolina is the #1 seed in that region, and they are not really a prospect team this year. Harrison Ingram, maybe a second-round pick. Talented guy. RJ Davis is maybe a two-way kind of guy, a good guard in college basketball for sure. I would note Jalen Washington is a sleeper, but not a great prospect team for a #1 seed. Deron Holmes from Dayton is a potential first-round pick, I would say. He's an older guy, but certainly very talented, big, has become a lot more well-rounded, better shooter than he used to be, etc. Also, Baylor has Jalen Bridges, in addition to other guys I mentioned before, has a pretty interesting prospect. Arizona's got like 5 or 6 guys, but they're all kind of in that late first, maybe probably second round range for me. Pella Larson, Keshad Johnson, KJ Lewis, Kylan Boswell, and Caleb Love, formerly of North Carolina. Clemson has PJ Hall, who's an interesting second round pick, kind of big man. Tyon Grant Foster from Grand Canyon is very old, but a pretty interesting prospect. I think he's 24 years old right now. So a lot of guys in that region. Only 2, though, I would say are first rounders, and maybe a third with Deron Holmes. To the East region, real quickly. UConn is the number 1 overall seed in the tournament. They are obviously talented, and they have 2 pretty much definite top 20 guys. Stephon Castle, lottery pick for me. Donovan Clingan also might be a lottery pick, and he'd be interesting for Atlanta, as would Castle. So those are guys to definitely watch for the first round for the Hawks. Further down the board, second round picks for me, Alex Caravan and Cam Spencer, draftable. Tristan Newton as well, potential guy that I like as kind of a sleeper guy. Probably they have 5 of the top 7 or 8 guys in the whole region for me, draft-wise, are on the same team. And they're number 1 seed, so not a huge surprise. Illinois has 2 guys, Terrence Shannon, who definitely has some off-court concerns that I will talk about at a later date, not today, but he is a good college basketball player, good prospect, off-court concerns for sure. Coleman Hawkins is draftable, a guy in the second round probably. Iowa State has Milan Momcilovic, who is a bucket, to be sure. He's not afraid to shoot. Jackson Robinson from BYU is a prospect. John L. Davis from FAU, interesting enough. I like Tucker DeVries from Drake as well. Coach's son there, but also a very good prospect. Janai Broom from Auburn, could be a second round pick. Jalen Williams, yes, another Jalen Williams from Auburn this year. And then Jaden Ledee from San Diego State is a guy that I've always enjoyed as well. Lastly, region-wise, is the Midwest. And the biggest name there is Dalton Connect from Tennessee. He has been having a ridiculous season for Tennessee. He's very old and also is coming off of being in a D2 program literally last year, but he has been an All-American level player, scorer, 3-level scorer, I should say, shooter, really talented guy. He's definitely the biggest guy in this region. Virginia had my personal favorite guy in Ryan Dunn, but they already lost in the first 4, unfortunately. So he's an awesome defensive prospect. We'll talk about him more later on. Kansas was going to have Kevin McCullough, who's a potential first-round pick, but he's actually going to be out for the season now, unfortunately. So that's a guy that could have been in the mix. It's not going to be in the mix anymore this week. They do have Johnny Furphy, who's a freshman, potential first-round pick. Good size, good shooter, good athlete. Could be a first-round pick. Again, as I mentioned before, kind of a late riser. Zach Edey is very, very polarizing in NBA draft circles. I know ESPN has him ranked as a top 20 pick. I know a lot of people that have him as like an undraftable player. So like the range is extremely wide on Zach Edey. I don't know the answer. I'm probably a little bit on the lower side compared to where ESPN is at least, but he is an awesome college basketball player. Best player in the country, but polarizing prospect, 7'3", 7'4", super talented. We'll see. He is draftable in my opinion. Not a first-round pick for me, but there you go. Creighton has a couple guys who are interesting. Trey Alexander and Baylor Shireman, who I think are both like top 40 for me. I could see Ryan Kalkbrenner, their center, being a late second-round pick. More of a backup kind of guy, probably long-term, but certainly interesting. South Carolina has Colin Murray Boyles, who although he actually said recently he's going to come back to the draft, come back to college. We'll see on that, but I think he might be a top 40 guy if he comes out. N'Faly Dante from Oregon is a talented player, former 5-star big. Dylan Mitchell, Isaiah Stevens from Colorado State, etc., etc. So it's a lot of names throughout you in one place. I recommend there's lots of reading to be done on this. Ben, who I've had on the podcast recently, has been doing this. Brian Schroeder, a friend of mine, been on the show many times, has written about the draft. I know there's a new mock draft from Sam Vecini. There's a new mock and write-up from Jonathan Goni of ESPN. It's a good time, if you are not ready for draft stuff just yet, to go ahead and jump in now. But again, keep in mind 2 things. Number 1, college is not the strongest part of this draft necessarily, but these guys are all interesting still. And number 2, you want to watch more than just the NCAA tournament. It's a good time to jump in, but teams should be watching a lot more previously. Workouts to come, combine stuff, etc., etc. Don't get too carried away, I would say, but the Hawks might, I want to stress, might have 2 picks in the top 20 this year. So they'll be an interesting team if that happens. And again, it depends on the Kings pick. And if you missed that in the past, somehow, if the Kings miss the playoffs, they'll keep their pick. If they make the playoffs, that pick will become the Hawks pick. So keep that in mind for the future. Okay, enough of that. We'll get into the rest of the Hawks-related program items on today's podcast, including Bogey as a 6th Man of the Year candidate, and then also a brief look ahead to Thursday's games. But first, I'll tell you about our friends at Nissan. Today's show is brought to you by Nissan. And are you the kind of driver that puts things a little bit further when you are behind the wheel? Do you ever wonder about adventures that could be right around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a perfect lineup of SUVs with capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes alike. As a class exclusive Google built-in that is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything when you are behind the wheel. Gone are the days of connecting your phone because Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system at the Nissan Rogue, and 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next big adventure. And their lineup is also incredible across the board. That includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, which has seating up to 8 people, has expansive cargo capacity, and along with an advanced available 4x4 capability, also has 284 horsepower with the Pathfinder, up to 6,000 pounds of towing as well. And when adventure calls, Pathfinder is going to be there to answer that call for you. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, and Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. One more time, that's nissanusa.com. All right, before I dive into the Hawks-Suns game on Thursday, I shared this a little bit on social media on Tuesday and Wednesday, so I got a few responses to this. I just want to say that I think Bogey should be a bigger deal for this Expanded Year award. I think he has a real case right now, and that might be called a homer in some respects, but I promise you I'm not saying that for no reason. I've looked at the numbers. A brief look here. He's currently the second leading scorer among players who qualify in terms of, like, basically the only qualifier for Sixth Man of the Year is playing enough games, but also not playing more games as a starter than on the bench. You got to play more than half your games off the bench, which Bogey's going to do. Even though he's been starting recently, he's still going to qualify. So he's the second leading scorer of anyone who qualifies. That's number one. Pretty impressive in itself. It's always been a scoring-based award. Whether it should be or not, put that to the side, but it kind of has been. Jamal Crawford, Lou Williams, Jordan Clarkson, all those guys. This is an important one for me anyway. The Hawks are currently 11.4 points better per 100 possessions with Bogey on the court than when he is off the court. That is the single biggest swing on the roster. Bigger than Trey, bigger than Jalen. Name your player. Bogey has the biggest on-off split in a positive direction on the Hawks team. And it's not a fluke. They just play better when he plays. That's real. Also, he's played the most total minutes of any bench player in the league. So not only is he playing well when he plays, he's playing a lot of minutes. So total contributions, you could argue Bogey might be number one on the list. I'm not saying he has to be number one on the list, but he should be a top 3 or 4 candidate to me. I won't do the entire list right now, but for instance, Malik Monk is currently a pretty big betting favorite to win the award. I do get why he's there, because he has a couple of edges on Bogey, efficiency-wise, passing-wise this year. Plus, the team is better. That's always it probably shouldn't matter as much as it does for sixth man. I get it for MVP. But anyway, I don't know why he's a minus 900 favorite at FanDuel and Bogey is 100 to 1. That gap doesn't make any sense. I think Bogey probably is number 2 or 3 for me on my ballot right now. If he closed big this year, he could win it, in my opinion, at least on my personal evaluation. I'm not saying he's going to win it or that he should win it right now, but I think he should be an actual candidate. There's been a lot of focus on Jalen and most improved player, which, by the way, that dream, I think, ended today with him missing the game tomorrow. But I think Bogey should be a real candidate for Sixth Man of the Year, and hopefully people will notice that in the coming days. I'm not telling you to bet on him or anything like that, but it's just a noticeable thing that I kind of threw out there because I think it's kind of gotten lost among everything that's going on with the Hawks and Jalen and all that stuff. Okay, last thing. The Hawks play in Phoenix on Thursday. It's their final game of the infamous 5-game West Coast trip that always happens every year. The last time, by the way, that the Hawks will start a game after 9 p.m. all year long is Thursday. That's merciful after this week of late nights. Also, again, this is the 5-game homestand. They have a 5-game homestand that begins on Saturday when they come back. So they have this long road trip. They come back and they're at home for like 2 weeks. So a nice little respite. It's actually a back-to-back for Phoenix. So the Suns have not played as I'm recording this podcast tonight, but they're going to play tonight against Philadelphia at home. They don't have to travel, but still, it's a rest advantage for the Hawks because they would have already been in Phoenix, not playing today, etc. On the other side, it's always hard to play that last game on the trip. Everybody's going to be gassed. It's game 5, so it's kind of a toss-up there. The Hawks did win the first matchup against Phoenix at home in early February. Trey had a big game in that game, 32-15 for Trey. Okongwu was really good in that game as well. Plus, the Hawks had 7 of their top 8 guys. Only Hunter was out for them, so obviously a different roster situation now than it was then. Phoenix is quite good on offense. They've actually been a little bit underachieving on the whole this year, I would say, because Phoenix is all in to win now. They are all in financially to win now after trading for Bradley Beal. All that stuff. This is not a Suns podcast, but keep that in mind. This is a team that is good, and they don't have a ton of injuries. Like tonight, we won't know till tomorrow about tomorrow's game, but for tonight's game, they're only missing Damian Lee, former Hawk, and Josh Okogie, local Atlanta product. So, but those are like not their top guys. Keep that in mind as well. But they're basically elite on offense when KD and Booker both play, and they're even better when they have Durant, Booker, and Beal playing together, which should be the case, you would think, on Thursday, TBD. They're also great at getting in the line, and they're a great shot-making team. Grayson Allen is having a great shooting season, so not a lot of places to hide defensively. It'll be a challenge through that aspect. But defensively, they're not anything special. They're just average. They don't a lot of free throws, which is probably a positive thing for their defense. But they're actually not great at creating turnovers or rebounding. So the Hawks have some, I would say, physicality advantages potentially in this matchup. Again, as I record this before they play tonight, Phoenix only 8-8 in their last 16 games, so they're not playing that well, but they are good. And having to go to Phoenix, it's tough. Again, before they play tonight, I believe, Phoenix is currently 21-14 at home this year. So not dominant at home, but certainly better than you would think. And all that thrown in the mix, and pre-Phoenix's injury report, the Hawks are currently 9.5-point underdogs, according to our friends at FanDuel. Again, that could change because the Suns play tonight, but part of that's because the Hawks are banged up. So in addition to Trey still being out, Bays being out, of course, Bumpkin's still out, Griffin, Lundy, Gay, etc. Jalen Johnson is going to be out for this game. We do not have a full update on Jalen, but he left the game, as I talked about a lot on the podcast, after Monday's game with the right ankle injury. The Hawks list him literally as having a right ankle injury, not a sprain. They have not done an official release on that, but he's not going to play on Thursday. So that unfortunately crosses Jalen off the list, I believe, if you do the math on most improved player pursuits, but also just for this game, that's a huge loss. He's obviously currently one of the best players. With or without Trey, he's really, really good, and that's a huge loss. So not having Jalen or Sadiq, make sure you have to go back to Hunter. Obviously, is the primary forward, but you have V. Krejci, probably some guys like West. West is listed as questionable with illness, so he might be able to play. Dylan Windler could be an option. Veet will play a lot, I'm sure. Garrison and Bogey. Maybe some Okongwu with the 4. It wouldn't surprise me with Jalen out if they tried Okongwu at the 4 at some point next to Clint or next to Bruno. We'll see. But roster challenges abound. So it's a back-to-back for Phoenix and not Atlanta. That's a little bit helpful, but certainly our friends at FanDuel have the Hawks painted in a difficult spot. 9.5-1 underdogs. By the way, this is the third game in a row they will have been 9 or 9.5-1 underdogs, and they went 1-2 in the first two. Sorry, 1-1 in the first two. So maybe 1-2. We'll see how this goes. It's certainly a tough spot, but not impossible to win by any means against a Phoenix team that's not exactly been dominant at times this season. Okay, that's all I have on today's podcast. I'll have a full breakdown, of course, after the game on Thursday, late into the night and into the morning on Friday. So stay tuned for that. Please subscribe to the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple, Spotify, YouTube on the video side, likes, ratings, reviews, shares, all that fun stuff. If you are a listener that is new, thank you for joining us. Also, if you are an audio-only subscriber, you will also see some bonus content for the folks at Locked On Sports Atlanta. Those will be labeled as the postcast after games. Just some extra content, nothing less from me. They have their own YouTube channel, but only that we kind of share the audio channel. They're on our feeds for some extra content. And also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there as well at BT Rowland. I write about the Hawks as well, patreon.com/BT Rowland if you are into that at all. And thank you for listening, as always. Hopefully this will be getting to you and into your ears with plenty of time to spare after a long day on Thursday. Again, a 10:30 start Thursday evening, so throw on the coffee, watch some college basketball in the meantime, and then join us for the post-game festivities. Thanks for listening, everybody. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you all next time.